It's a fence. I can either sit on it or come down on one side or the other. Chad. Dear Chad, you're a great friend of the channel. You come on, you speak your mind and you tell us what's what, and that's great. And I really appreciate that, because we are nowhere on the Tube of the U. I see already another YouTuber has said that they think you've jumped the shark with this bridge diving video, and maybe they're right. So I need to now come up with a clever analogy. Let's go for, is it a bridge too far?
We've paid for that bridge and we're going to collect.
Alan and Bruce have already posted videos with their comments and thought about it, so I thought I'd do the same. But first, let's hear from Bruce and then Alan.
So Chad has obviously chosen his strategy, and that is do something controversial, get people talking about it. Because when they talk about this bridge dive, they're talking about Rotor Riot. They're talking about his brand and brand awareness. He needs more sales of Rotor Riot swag and motors and stuff like that, and more people watching the channel. So yeah, it's probably a purely commercial decision on the part of Chad Capper. I can understand where he's coming from. Goodness knows it's a hard enough job, you know, but he's just doing what is the logical commercial thing to do. Now, unfortunately, you take a risk with that. You really do, because if something had gone wrong with that bridge dive, then the effect on the Rotor Riot branding would have been disastrous. So long as things go well, this actually boosts the brand's awareness in the outside even the hobby into the general marketplace. Because if a news organization finds this video and they then hook it up with the drone hits, Black Hawk helicopter drone hits, plane landing in Montreal, all this sort of stuff, they're going to ramp it up and say, yeah, can you imagine the headline? Can you imagine the headline? Hundreds escape death as drone plummets down side of bridge. You know, that's what we'll get in the media. We've got to remember that when it comes to the media, perception is reality. It doesn't matter that that was, no one got hurt, no one, not even any gear was broken, because if the media get hold of it and they want to sell some papers and get some eyes on web pages and on TV, then they will hype the crap out of it.
This is the Alex Fraser Bridge. It's a key connector to downtown Vancouver, with over 100,000 vehicles passing it every single day at speeds of over 70 kilometers an hour. If one of those small drones hit a vehicle as it was moving, the consequences could be catastrophic.
The potential for a collision is significant if they lose control of the drone. It's a distraction, if nothing else, if they fly it low enough, or like I say, if they lose control and if it were to hit the vehicle. Ultimately, they could be facing fines of up to $3,000. Now, if they are operating a business and it's a business venture, it could be upwards of $15,000.
Okay, and I did watch that video on my way here. It was a channel called Rotor Riot, and I believe they do FPV quad racing type of videos, so a lot of speed, adrenaline junkies. And in this one here, they apparently did a dive down a bridge, and it was here in BC. And I guess a lot of you guys noticed this, and you asked basically for me to look at it and whether or not I guess it was crazy illegal in many ways. Okay, first things first, I don't know what size drone they were using, for example. Like, is it 250 grams? I don't know. I don't watch these guys usually. And at the same time, did they have permission to do that? That I don't know. So I guess I'll just look at it based on what they captured. What do I think about it and all that in terms of, does it hurt us, for example, like here in Canada? Because to my understanding, a lot of these guys are from the US and they came here to actually fly, which makes me wonder, why don't you just do that in the US? Isn't there like a bunch of bridges there? Generally speaking, you could say they violated pretty much a lot of stuff. And so it makes you wonder, does it hurt us? For example, like a person like myself who flies it recreationally, like here, I'm just walking around, I usually use it just to get aerial shots. Does it hurt like a person like me? Unfortunately, for a person like myself, I guess in some ways it does hurt a person like myself, because most people will actually push videos like that. They'll say, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. And this is the one that people are going to use to say, look at those dangerous people, for example. Like, ban them all because you want to, quote, have fun.
So that's what Bruce said and what Alan said. Of course, Alan's got the most to lose because he's in Canada. I thought when I would make this video up that I was going to expound upon aviation safety, and safety is a good thing and all this, and I realized very quickly I'd been making it up and talking nonsense. So I thought, who could I really ask? And the person to ask is Craig Lippett from Clear Sky Consulting. He's about the only grown-up I know, and he knows safety. So Craig, thanks very much for taking your time out this morning to talk nonsense with me. First of all, have you seen this bridge diving video?
Yeah, I have. I saw it before you sent it to me, so I was aware of the video and some of the discussion going on around the safety elements of it. So yeah.
And what struck my mind, I did a safety course a long time ago, and they told us very much that, and it was an aviation safety course, and it actually doesn't matter. Adding the word aviation to this and safety is nonsense, really. Safety is safety is safety, or whatever you're doing in life. But they said that that responsibility, really, it starts at the top. You don't go after the people at the bottom, you start at the top. And in my mind, Chad, mate, you really need to be thinking about that and thinking about what you're putting out there. And it's not the result of, it's not the pilot's fault, it's not the group's fault, it's you've put it out there, you're the boss. I don't know, maybe you can make more sense of safety beginning at the top, or whatever the best practice and thinking is now for me, Craig.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, essentially anything, whether it's safety or, it starts with good leadership in the organizations that are involved in the industry. And, in aviation terms, good leadership starts with regulators. It then moves down into the larger organizations like airlines and air traffic control agencies that are, regional, national, global. And it is absolutely about leadership because, putting the emphasis, the onus of responsibility on the pilot is, I think it is important, and it is outlined in most drone regulatory frameworks around the world. But for organisations such as Rotor Riot, there are people in charge, and ultimately they have to be socially responsible in terms of safety and privacy. I know that their business model is very much geared around YouTube and having sensational flying videos, and I can't argue with the fact that the flying element of it is. It's very skillful, very proficient, and there's no arguing with that. The question I have is that, or the issue I have really with that video is that they're essentially playing roulette with other people's lives, and that might sound a bit over the top as a statement. And obviously, people watching this are going to make the observation that, well, of course he's going to say that. He's a safety expert operating in the drone industry. He has a vested interest to say that because it probably builds his reputation, his business model, and whatever. But there's a wider aspect to all of this in that the pilot's playing roulette with the people on the bridge because they have a reasonable expectation, I think, to go out of the door every morning and expect to get back safely. And when they're crossing that bridge, they have no idea what's going on above them. They can't react to it. If something, as Bruce pointed out in his observation video, which was really good, it was bang on the money. Bruce pointed out that if it had, it spun a rotor, it gone out of control, hit a cable, and then landed on the roadway below, then there may have been a direct impact with a vehicle, or a vehicle might have had to swerve to avoid potentially hit other vehicles. And you might come at the, your reasoning about whether it might happen or not. I think it's a bit of a cop-out because essentially it's not about whether something happens or not that makes it justifiable. It's the whole purpose of safety is to try and address the issues before they happen. And there's far too much things in the world where things happen and then we're reactive to it because people die, essentially. People die and then there's a massive focus on it. And it's only at that point then that we start to motivate ourselves to change things. Well, we need to get out of that way of thinking. We need to start addressing it now. So, I would say that Chad has got, a socially, corporately responsible or responsibility, I think, to sort of dictate that. I know their model is very much about those sort of videos because they want likes, they want people to come and follow them and therefore generate revenue through advertising. But the wider aspect here is, aside from hitting somebody on the bridge, there is a reputational damage to the entire industry. Everyone who's, whether you're a radio control modeler, whether you're in the FPV world, whether you're a drone racer, whether you're a commercial operator, or whether you're simply somebody who's bought a drone in a local electronics store and you're using it to go out and do basic photography, we're all going to be affected because public perception is hanging in the balance at the moment, and so are a lot of regulatory perceptions of drones, and the impact's going to affect us all. It only takes one major event which the media focus on, and then, you know, it doesn't matter whether you are a YouTuber, whether you're a commercial operator, we're all going to be affected by the changes negatively. I would suspect. I mean, the irony of it is, at the start of that video, they put a disclaimer on saying, and I had to laugh. They put a disclaimer on saying that, you know, you should educate yourself for the local rules and regulations in the country you're going to operate. And then the last one, which was interesting, was always fly safe. And then they, you know, straight away went on to show a video that was, you know, good levels of flying piloting proficiency, great, but is it in any way safe? I would say absolutely not.
And there's a very instant gotcha in that I think the maximum altitude allowed is 90 meters in Canada, and the top of that bridge is 137. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you got you then straight away without even looking.
I know. I mean, there's a bit of a subculture going on in the commercial drone world. Certainly in the UK, they'll see a video on YouTube that looks, you know, and then everyone will start to pick it apart, as in, you know, well, it looks to me like they're flying unsafely. They're flying down over people on a road, and, you know, are they commercially qualified? Do they have a safety case exemption in place? All those sort of things. And, you know, we all try to second guess, but ultimately, I think, you know, we're all grown-ups to a degree where we can determine what's unsafe and what is safe. And, you know, I just thought it was, whether they thought it was safe or not, it was irresponsible flying. And that might be from a fuddy-duddy 48-year-old guy who's looking back on these. And I don't have a problem with these guys, you know, generating these sort of videos, but they've got to be sort of responsible in doing so.
I know, and I'm facing that exact. I'm older than you. I'm the 50-year-old fuddy-duddy guy, and I've got a 13-year-old lad, and I had a chat with him about it, and he did actually say, but nothing happened. And I think, again, from the safety courses, I think, isn't that one of the what's the scenarios or bad attitudes that people can have, is, or nothing's going to happen to me, but nothing happened. Am I right or wrong? Maybe you can unpack that if I'm either right or wrong.
Well, no, you are right in that. I mean, safety is about trying to be proactive. So it's understand where the safety gaps are and trying to do something about it before something happens, before there's an incident and then ultimately an accident. And throughout the history of safety in pretty much every industry, the problem is that you can't completely address all of the safety issues. You just got to try on an aggregate basis, try and address all of the main points so that the overall safety effect keeps you as safe as possible. You can't be completely safe, because otherwise none of us would get out of bed in the morning. We wouldn't get into cars, we wouldn't fly drones commercially or otherwise, because there's risk everywhere. But the mindset does have to change a little, because people, generally human nature is to operate as they will, and then if something happens, they'll worry about it. And there are documented cases and I've spoken with many drone operators who will be operating out in the middle of nowhere. There'll be no witnesses. They'll do something. It'll crash. They'll crash the drone into a tree, and quite literally, they'll look around them and go, "Okay, nobody saw that." And so, it might have been pilot error, but I'll worry about that another time. And then they go out and buy a new drone, and they don't really learn the lessons. What it is about is doing your best to try and be proactive about all these safety elements, and then learning the lessons as we go along. And it's the reason why the aviation industry's safety record has improved dramatically in the last 40 years.
The thing that guides my old man's pocket safety or skill set is actually my wallet, because I can't afford to crash like Billio. That has a very strong influence on the manner in which I fly. And I will, in Dan, my lad's defense, I will say he often tells me off for the way that I fly, and he is much safer than me. He is much safer than me.
I think, I mean, you make a valid point here about affordability, because let's face it, I mean, how many airlines can afford to lose an airliner in some form of event? You know, a multi-million-pound piece of kit that is very sophisticated, difficult to maintain, and if you lose it, you lose it. You know, that's a lot of money off the bottom line. Whereas in drone terms, you know, your average unmanned aircraft you can buy off the internet now, sometimes as low as a couple of $100 or pounds. Some of them are more expensive, obviously, but there's still essentially affordable items. They're almost throwaway items, and I think this leads into this idea that, you know, if I crash it and nobody sees, then A, I'm not liable, but B, I'm not, you know, financially I can probably recover by going out to buy another one, and everything will be all right. I think, I mean, I've touched before, and I think you published one of my articles where we talked about a just culture. Now, I'm not expecting a just culture to be implemented by everyone who's operating drones, because that, I think, is unrealistic. But I mean, in the commercial world, drone operators need to start changing their mindset to the idea to follow the model of the aviation community, you know, in that you do have to act responsibly. And the key principle for me is, for just culture is what happens, is what you do when nobody is looking. So in other words, when you crash your drone into a tree and you realize that there was a major problem with the equipment, and other people might learn from your experiences, then you go and report it. And unfortunately, it means putting your head above the parapet. I mean, in this case, I'm not expecting the guys from Rotor Riot to start reporting themselves or events and incidents, because all they're doing is they're bringing attention to some of the things that may not necessarily be abiding by the law.
Yes. Well, it's funny you should mention that, because and it didn't happen to me. Honest, this did not happen to me. It did happen to a friend.
Right.
He was flying a hot air balloon, and against the forecast, it fogged up underneath him, and he had a bit of a pickle, and he put a report in about that, just to say, oh look, I was in this position, this position, and this position, and this happened, and this is what I did to get out of the situation. And blow me down if the CAA didn't come after him, having volunteered that information, because in a lot of ways it can be easier after the fact. So I think people must have to, you know, they'll be wary of doing that. But I hear what you're saying. I was going to add on a little extra bit of video after this from outside, but I think I'm going to talk to you about it instead, because you'll probably come up with some good answers. I think one of the problems with Rotor Riot is that they're trying to build their brand and reputation, and the comments. If you look in the comments of this video, they're super positive and super negative. They're both ways. And if you're trying to build a brand, I think the hate, and it's hate on both sides at each other, and hate builds hate. And if they keep putting their necks out like this, I can't see how they're gonna build a positive brand out of that. Having built Chad built a fantastic brand with Flight Test. They coincidentally have put out a video today where they're laughing, joking, and mucking about, and that's the right attitude. I don't know. I'm rambling that through. Have you got any thoughts on that? Can I drag you in on that, Craig?
No, as far, I mean, basically, I think the thing about social media, whether it's YouTube or LinkedIn or WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, I mean, it has a tendency to generate polarity of opinion. So there are not normally people in the middle. The people that are likely to comment are people who are going to be very supportive or very critical of what they're actually seeing. And perhaps, you know, Rotor Riot are tapping into that part of human nature.
You're right.
In that, there is an old saying in marketing that, you know, no publicity is bad. No, any publicity is good publicity. Good publicity, yeah. So, you know, so even if, you know, if people are discussing it, then they're raising their profile. Now, whether that is, you know, corporately socially responsible is another question. The point is that I think they're probably playing into that because it benefits their brand in some way, because people are talking about it. I mean, at the moment, there are people like myself being interviewed about it, and this is going to go on the internet and generate more discussion, and there'll be different, there'll be a polarity of views about what I'm saying, and then people will make comments along those sort of lines. I think it's a path that we're all stuck with. We do have to discuss it, and we have to discuss it openly like human beings, because ultimately it affects all of us. But yeah, you're right.
I knew you were grown up. You come up with a better think through than I did on that. I knew it. Okay. I knew it.
Well, I'll try my best.
Yeah. If we as an industry, what are we going to do? Because and as you correctly said at the beginning, it's not just commercial drone flyers. It's people that have bought it from the hobby or from a big box store to fly the occasional photos. It's error modelers. This is dragging in a wide net of people if we're not careful. And it's going to change regulation across the board. And we're in a really dodgy time as regards regulations, I think. How is the industry going to police, react, sort out best practice? Why aren't we doing that, Cobb? Lots of big questions there. Why aren't we sorting out best practice?
Well, I think we are, but we're not necessarily doing it on a global scale. There are lots of pockets of communities of interest that are, people like the FPV community, radio control models, the commercial drone operators in all of the nations around the world. We all basically have a vested interest in supporting safety, I think, personally, and I'm a huge advocate for obvious reasons. I think that although safety is the remit of regulators, where things really start to come into play is when the industry starts to come together, to coalesce and start to produce some form of self-regulation. And that happened, and that was evident in the airline industry through the sort of 80s and 90s, when the loss rate of airliners was such in the 60s and 70s. They were going down on a routine basis, and the airlines were taking a huge commercial hit through all the cost of those incidents and accidents from a whole host of factors. And what they did was they started to come together, they started to talk, they started to work with the regulators to sort of improve the regulation, understand better human factors and how to implement ways to sort of address human factor issues. And that self-regulation has put them in a place now where the airline industry particularly is, their safety record has improved quite dramatically, to the extent that, they probably only 4 or 5 airliners a year now go down in some form of accident. And that is an enormous increase in safety standards. But it's been done largely because the industry has come together. They've recognized that there is strength in numbers, rather than sit on the sidelines and say, I'm going to forge my own path. I'm not going to worry about anyone else. There is a vested interest for everyone to come together and talk about these issues. And we have to talk about them in a grown-up way and accommodate other people's views, but shape a consensus that moves us forward. Because at the moment, the rate of change is enormous. It's, I started operating drones 6-7 years ago, and the difference between the drones I was flying then and the ones that are now commercially available is unbelievable. It's so different. And where are we going to be in 4 or 5 years' time? So these conversations need to start now. And I know that there are some conversations, there are trade associations and regional discussions, but it's really about the industry. I think the challenge is understanding what constitutes the industry, because there's not one collection of individuals who would consider themselves to be an industry. There are a number of different agencies, entities, organizations, sometimes individuals like myself, who have their own interests and are trying their best to bring people together, to have discussions, to try and generate new concepts and build consensus. But often it's very difficult because there are so many agendas out there, so many people who are working to a different strategy, and often they don't want to listen, or they have their own path to follow. So, ultimately there are some significant challenges, but I think the way forward here is that the industry needs to kind of have a word with itself a little and then start to collaborate more.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point to end on, because okay. I've already taken a few minutes of your time, so it's going to be 10 minutes, a bit more than that.
No worries, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
I'll drop this in, and we'll hopefully see you on a Tuesday at 2100 GMT sometime soon. Thanks, Craig.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Gary.
All right, mate.